The push rods in this kit might be a little bit tricky, seemingly, but they're really not that bad. Just a few things that you need to understand about how these work compared to push rods you might be already familiar with. With these push rods, they're already marked intake and exhaust. The one I happen to have right now is an intake push rod. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to go ahead and screw the bottom off. And we're going to set this down into our lifter base. This and the push rod tube are going to go up into the head, and this is going to go together. Now from that point, I'm going to go ahead and move this lifter tube just for the sake of showing you how this works. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to screw this onto the threads until it stops, once it's together. This is where I had some questions about it, and once looking at it was easy. Once this bottoms onto the threaded portion, you'll then lock down this lock nut, this first one, and that secures the bottom portion of the push rod itself. From there, it operates like a standard push rod would, where you would then adjust your length and then you would lock the top. So it's really not too difficult. Don't forget to use Loctite and also follow your instructions that are included in your kit. We're ready to adjust the lifters. We need to raise the rear end of the bike up, and we're going to put it in 6 gears so we can rotate the engine. Next, we need to remove the spark plugs so that the engine can be rotated. And then we're going to be putting it into 6th gear. Okay, before we install the lifters, what we need to do is make sure that the front cam is in overlap position. What that's going to be is that the 2 front lifters are going to be moving and the back 2 lifters are going to be staying stationary. When they're both stationary and in their lowest position in the rear, they're both on the base circle, and that will allow us to install the push rods on the rear cylinder. So I'm going to go ahead and roll the engine, and I'm going to be feeling in here for those front push rods to both be moving at the same time. Okay, we're going to be installing the rear intake. I've got the push rod separated with just a little bit sticking out on the end. I've got the O-ring above the outer cover. I'm going to slide my push rod in. Okay, then we need to force this push rod cover up and in. We've got a screwdriver that's got some tape on it so I don't damage any fins. I'm going to go ahead and try to hike that up there. And then here's the tool. It's got a top and a bottom on it. You want to set that down in there and right underneath. At this point, we're able to take our push rod cover holder and turn it towards the back so that we have some more access. Now what we need to do is we need to take the threaded portion of this push rod, and it's way up into the body. We need to run it all the way down till it bottoms in the bottom portion of our push rod for strength on this push rod. And then what I'm going to do is get it started. I just slightly tighten these 2 together. I'm going to hold on to the body, and I'm going to go ahead and start running that down. Okay, now that we've got our threaded portion of the push rod bottomed out in the bottom portion of the push rod, it's time to lock that down. The instructions say that you can use Loctite if you wish. Be really careful with the Loctite so that you don't get it down into the lifter area. We're just going to put the smallest little dab of Loctite on there. And we're going to run this lock nut down. And what we're going to do is we're going to secure that threaded portion to the bottom portion of the push rod. Just like that. Now what we want to do is we want to adjust this bottom portion that's locked down until we have 0 lash. If you look right now, we have some movement, don't we? So what we're going to do now is we're going to run this down till we have 0. And I like to wiggle them around a little bit just to make sure that we have everything sitting in the cups. And right now it looks to me like we have 0. I've taken a paint marker and I've marked these threads, and what we want to do now is we want to get 4 complete revolutions of this bottom lock nut threaded portion. The top portion we're going to be holding stable with a wrench, and then we're going to add 2 flats. Right now the flat is facing me. And there's 1. There's 2. There's 3. There's 4, and there's my flat facing me. And there's 1 flat facing me. Second flat facing me. What I want to do next is I want to put a small drip of Loctite up here, and I'll be locking the top portion of the push rod to the threaded portion with this lock nut. Now before you can turn the engine over, do anything else, these are brand new lifters. Brand new lifters generally will allow you to go ahead and turn the push rod like I can do with my fingers right now. If these happen to have been pumped up at one time, or if they're used lifters from your existing build, then this may not be able to turn with your fingers. Do not rotate the engine until these are able to be turned. Typically it takes 20 minutes to 40 minutes for them to bleed down. These are already ready to go, so I can continue on to my exhaust push rod. Okay, I'm ready to install my rear push rod. The first thing I want to remember to do, take the O-ring out of the lifter base and place it onto your push rod tube like that, because that way it can get pinched and it'll be ready for use later. Now I've got my push rod ready to go in, and I've got the bottom off just like the intake one, so go ahead and get this in. Got the pushrod tube holder with the pushrod tube up out of the way. I've got my lower portion of my pushrod. I'm about to get that installed. And then again, I'm going to run this threaded portion down into the bottom of this and lock it off. And then we'll adjust for 0 lash. And then we're going to put our 4 turns, 2 flats on. Okay, just like on the intake valve on the rear, we're on our base circle yet. And I ran this threaded portion from the body of the push rod down into this lower part until it stopped. Now I'm going to apply just a small amount of thread locker on there, and I'm going to run our locking nut down, and I'm going to lock that. After locking that, I'm going to go for 0 lash. So that's where we're going to go next. Okay, we're at 0 lash now. You can see this moves back but doesn't really move up and down. I've got a flat towards me. We're going to take our little paint tool, put a dot on the threads, and we're going to count 4 and 2 flats. There's 1. There's 2. There's 3. There's 4. There's our flat facing me. There's 1 flat, 2 flats. Now what we need to do is we need to lock this other locking nut to the top portion of the push rod. We're going to put just a small amount of thread locker on there. Make sure you don't overdo the thread locker because we do not want to get that into our lifters. All it takes is just a little bit. And that's tight. Now before we roll the engine over once again, we want to make sure that these roll with your fingers. If they don't easily roll, you don't want to turn the engine over. These do because they're brand new lifters. So we're going to go ahead and close up this back portion. We're going to get the rear into overlap and the front on the base circle. We'll do the same thing in the front. Okay, we're getting ready to install the front push rods. What we want to do is make sure that the rear push rods are in overlap and the front push rods are on the base circle. And if you watch, you'll see both of these rear push rods moving as I rotate the engine. Now that we've got our 2 front lifters on the base of the cam, the 2 rear ones are in overlap. We're ready to go ahead and put these in. Just repeat the process the same on the front as you did on the rear. We've got our front intake push rod all adjusted. It does roll and it's ready to be closed up. We have to install our front exhaust push rod. And one more thing I want to mention one more time. These are marked intake and exhaust. This one here happens to say exhaust on it. Make sure you don't get those mixed up. And one last thing, make sure that you don't rotate your engine unless these push rods are free enough to move with your fingers. We've got the push rods installed now. I left the spark plugs out. We've rotated the engine a few times. There's no binding. Everything is working as it should. The next thing we need to do is install the intake.